What's going on, guys? So today I'd like to talk a little bit about a Turbo 400 transmission. So I'm leaving to go into work, and I thought I'd do a little quick video about how I'm going to set up the Turbo 400 to do what I want to do in the Firebird. Lots of guys are afraid of a Turbo 400 because it doesn't have overdrive. Well, I'm here to tell you, boys and girls, that if you put a turbo on an LS motor and you gear the rear end appropriately, you don't need overdrive. The way I'm getting this done is a bit unorthodox in the hot rodding world. Most guys put manual valve bodies in the Turbo 400 transmission, which what that means is every gear has to be shifted by a shifter, by the operator, the driver of the vehicle. A Turbo 400 transmission came about in the 60s, and what it was the answer to was the 2-speed power glide. And the 2-speed power glide is also used in hot rods, usually found in cars that are pretty light, usually found in cars that make over 800 horsepower or so, 700 depending on the weight of the vehicle. They work very well, but they're not as streetable because you have to gear them kind of in a mid-range gear. Usually guys are in quite a bit of tire. So with the 400, it's been in tons of vehicles. It's been in, even besides GM vehicles, it's been in some foreign stuff. It's been in Rolls-Royce before. It's been in, I don't know, maybe Mercedes. I don't know, BMW maybe. I don't know. It's been in like 3 or 4 different foreign vehicles before, which is kind of bizarre. If you look it up on Wikipedia, I'm sure you can find out more about it. So it's typically an automatic 3-speed automatic transmission with reverse park. So normal operation of a Turbo 400 was an automatic. It would shift 1, 2, 3 on its own, and it would downshift 3, 2, 1, come into a stop. And there's different ways to control them. There's vacuum modulation, which has to do with the vacuum modulator that goes on the side of the transmission. That kind of helps aid the transmission in knowing how much load is on the engine, and it helps to adjust shift points kind of on its own. Also, there's a little thing inside the transmission called a governor, and the governor works in the valve body. And I'm not a transmission expert, but I do know that you can adjust the weights of the governor kind of like the weights of a distributor. So if you tinker with that, you can get different shift points at part throttle and at full throttle. So it's kind of a trial and error, but there's a pretty standard you can usually hit for around, say, shifting at 6,000, or, you know, maybe shifting around, you know, part throttle shifts 1,500 or 2,000 RPM, wherever. There'll be a standard, and it's just a matter of trial and error to find that. Most gearheads and hot rod guys want to take away the automatic portion of the Turbo 400. They want to be able to shift it on their own, and typically they go with a manual valve body. More often than not, it's a reverse manual valve body. And what that means is you have park all the way forward, you have reverse 1 click back, and then you have 1. You have first gear, and then you have second gear, and you have third gear. As the back, you know, as you pull the stick back, you have your gear, your next gear would be a backwards pull as opposed to a forward push. To me, it's kind of weird. I've driven them before. A buddy of mine had one in a car. I didn't really like it. I just felt like I was going backwards, literally. Every car I've had in the past that's been a 3-speed, either Turbo 350 or Turbo 400 transmission, even overdrives, one has been all the way to the bottom and you shift forward, literally forward to go up a gear. So you pull all the way back for 1, and you click it up for 2, and up for 3, and up for even 4 if it's an overdrive. And then you have neutral, and you have reverse, and you have park. So I did miss neutral before. So it's on a manual, on a reverse manual, it's park, reverse, neutral, 1, 2, 3. Which, driving around the street, it wouldn't be too bad going forward to downshift, but I don't know. I still don't really like the idea of having to manually shift the car all the time. So I did some thinking about it, and I talked to my transmission builder, and what we've decided to do is to keep the automatic function of the 400. We're going to run basically a TransGo, a modified TransGo shift kit that will allow me to manually shift the car whenever I want to, forward, forward, upshift or downshift anytime. Full manual control when I want it, or just put the thing in D, which would be third gear, and let it ride. It'll shift itself and it'll do its own thing, and then it may not shift exactly where I want it to, but that's when we tinker with the governor. Also, what I'm going to do is run a vacuum modulator on it. He's going to install that on it, and it's going to allow me to hook up a line from my reference point, where I'm going to have a block that's going to be basically a vacuum block under the hood that's going to have the power brakes, the vacuum signal from the brakes from the back of the intake manifold that goes to the brake booster. I'm going to tee off of that, and I'm going to have that brick that's going to have all the vacuum source off of it. It also has boost source. So what I'll have to do is I'll have to run a check valve or two that will prevent boost from going into the vacuum modulator, because if you throw boost in that thing, it's not going to work very well for very long, especially at like 20 pounds. That's my plan, and I think it'll work pretty well for everything I want to do with the car, because I can put it down into one manually. I can shift the car whenever I want to at the drag strip. I can shift it down from, say I'm cruising along like I am right now. I'm cruising down the highway, somebody comes up next to me to kind of play around, whatever, say it's deserted, there's nobody around, and I throw it down into 2 and push it from second gear. I rarely will need to go into first gear with this thing unless I'm at a full stop. I think it'll make enough power. The converter will work well enough where I don't need to throw it down into first. I think second gear will work just fine from anything from a average roll of 20 miles an hour on up to 80. I think it'll be fine. Manual mode when I want it with an override, and auto mode for just cruising. I think it's perfect. I think it'll work well. I think from what he's told me, it'll hold 1,000 engine horsepower. This build he's talking about doing for me, and it's only going to cost me $600. The PTC converter has been ordered. It'll be here soon. So I've got the Turbo 400. I ordered a Madman dipsticks. It's actually a bent factory spec dipstick that will allow me to fill the transmission easier. It's a larger tube. It's a pre-bent tube. It's not a steel braided jobber where it goes up and hooks over and it's hard to pour down. This actually is an S-bend, so I'll be able to use a funnel on the top, pour transmission fluid in it, fill it on the fly. It should be great. After talking to Dusty Bradford with PTC, I told him I wanted to have a converter that didn't need the adapter to run the truck spacer and all that stuff off the back of the motor. I'm going to go with a flat basic SFI flex plate on eBay. I want to say it was like $78 or something like that. I don't remember the auction, but I'll find it if anybody's interested in just PM me or reply to the video or comment or whatever, and I'll give you the information on it. I think it was CAT Specialties or CAT Racing or something like that. Anyway, that flex plate, PTC converter, what else? B&M pan. I'm gonna have to run a really big cooler to keep this thing happy. Heat is a main concern of mine. I think I'm likely gonna run a cooler in the back of the car, between the back bumper and the factory muffler. There's a void there on the bottom of the rear cubby. I can likely put that cooler there. You'll see the fan from the back of the car if you're really looking for it, but I don't really care. It's not a big deal. Most folks might think it's just an oil cooler. I could mount it up front with an intercooler. There's not going to be much airflow. I've had this problem before in the past with these cars where I've run a 4L80 and I could not get the thing to cool down because that stinking intercooler is so big and that area up front is actually pretty small and pretty occupied, especially when you retain air conditioning. So I'm planning on running the cooler in the back. I'm going to run a Derail brand setup. It's going to have I think it's like an 8-inch fan, and it's like a 10x10 cooler, so it's a pretty large setup. It comes with a thermostat and everything, so it kicks on at like 160 and turns off at 150, or maybe it's 170, 160. Anyway, it'll keep the transmission nice and cool, and it'll keep everything away from the heat of the front of the motor, so in the front of the car. So that's kind of the plan for that. As far as the rest of the transmission goes, I'm trying to think about, I'm going to run a UMI transmission crossmember with the torque arm relocation built into it. I'm not going to run a short torque arm. I've heard goods and bads about both. They all have their place and their purpose. For what I'm doing with this car, I think the long torque arm would be better. So I'm going to be running a Founders suspension full-length torque arm that they build, and I'm going to run it on a UMI Turbo 400 relocation, torque arm relocation bracket is what it is, and it's a transmission mount with a torque arm mount on it. That'll work best for what I'm going to do. The short torque arms tend to promote nosedive. When you brake hard, like on autocross, if I brake hard, it could potentially cause the rear end of the car to actually wheel hop due to that short catapulting arm of the short torque arm. So basically there's so much downforce tension on the front when you slam the brakes, it could potentially lift the rear end, which is pretty unlikely, but it can happen. So I don't want to even flirt with that. I don't really like that idea. The long arm is more versatile. It'll do what I want to do. It'll be more streetable. It'll be quiet. I think it'll work perfect for what I'm planning on doing with the car. Drive shaft, I'll likely go with a Spawn 3.5 steel, I think is what it is. It's their lower end. They've got the ultimate race jobber, and they've got the one that's a little bit smaller than that. I'm going to go with a smaller one. It's a steel. I think they're rated at like 800 or 1,000. I think it's going to be fine. I mean, the car, I've got an idea in mind for what I want to run at the track as far as a quarter-mile track for tire. I'll probably go with a Mickey Pro, but I don't think it's going to have the suspension under it to really cut killer 60-foots. It'll allow me to run the car at the local track when the local track isn't prepped well. A lot of Friday nights typically aren't prepped as well as like event days, so sure, I may run the car at different events like Street Car Takeover and stuff like that. And I know they've got a Ford Buick shootout. They don't limit it to Buicks anymore. It's really Buick, Olds, and Pontiac. So any modern Pontiac can be in it if it has a factory GM engine. So I could potentially run the car at that event. That's pretty cool because that's one I've always gone to in the fall. It's like one of the last events they have before they shut the track down here. They shut the track down in like early November. It's usually closed from November to January. So it's kind of, I think that'd be kind of fun. As far as shifter goes, I'm going to run the stock shifter, and I found one. I'm going to modify it. I'm going to shorten the stick. I want the car to look like it has a 6-speed in it still, just like for shows and stuff. I could pull the e-brake, put the shifter in neutral, and it would look like it's still a 6-speed car. And I know it's kind of silly. Maybe some might think it's dumb. I want the car to look stock at a glance. I want it to look factory. It'll be a little bit lower than factory. I think it looks more aggressive and it handles better, so I'm going to keep the Strano springs on it. It's got Strano springs, still got the conies on it. It'll have the front sway bar is bigger, the rear sway bar, I got to figure out what I'm going to do with it. But as far as the shifter goes, lower it, put a 6-speed ball on it. I'm going to use a MBA, I think an MBA adapter. Maybe it's Hawks Performance. I think it's Hawks that makes one that works better. It's a steel adapter that you actually adapt to the top of the threads of the factory stick. You can run a 6-speed ball on it. So I'm going to do that. It'll look factory. I'm going to retain the 6-speed console. I'm looking down because I'm looking at my console. It'll retain the leather boot around it. I think it'll look pretty sweet. We'll need to modify the stock gate to make it so first gear doesn't exist anymore. Because what it'll be is it'll be a it's a 4L60E shifter, so it's got an overdrive. So it'll be park, reverse, neutral, 4, 3, 2, 1. Well, I want to eliminate 1. I want to go 4, 3, 2, but really that would be 3, 2, 1. I think that will work best. So that's the plan. That's the 400 setup. Comments, suggestions, criticisms, whatever you guys think. I've thought a lot about it. I can throw it down into one to autocross. I can drive it around automatic without having to shift it all the time. I don't want to have to shift the car all the time. It gets old. I've had manual valve bodies. It's a street car. I'm going to drive it to work all the time. I want to drive the thing constantly. If I can keep it cool, if the converter has good manners, everything should be fine. We'll see how it goes. I can manually shift it when I want to. If it's a dog when I'm auto shifting it, at least it'll just get me around. The vacuum modulation should help. The governor shouldn't matter because I can manually shift it at the track if I want to. Even if I don't hit the 1-2 exactly every time, I think it's still going to be fine. So maybe it's possible I could, make the launch. If I'm not quick enough for the 1-2, or you know, don't want to fool with it, I could launch the car, throw it up into 2. It would keep the revs. It would shift manually, or shift automatically rather, from 1-2, and then I could hit that 3rd gear. I don't know. I think out of everything I could do with a 400, and know that I have a built transmission in the car that's built to handle what I'm doing, not just some throw together thing with a stock transmission that's got a shift kit in it, which ultimately everything has been replaced, new clutches, steels, all that good stuff. It should be pretty stout. Everything is in there to make the car handle the power it should. So shouldn't be any weak links to the drivetrain. I'm trying to build this thing as solid as I can. So hopefully the 88 will hold up. We'll take our chances, but like I said, it's not going to be on a slick. It'll be on a Mickey Pro, maybe even an ET Street R. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that yet. Maybe do an SS. I want the car to hook, but I want to be able to drive around on race tires every now and then. But wheels and tires is another conversation. We'll talk about that later. For now, please subscribe. There's a lot more content coming. Just building the car in stages and just sharing with everybody. Hope you enjoyed the videos. Have a great day.